some people are not coachable, is what I call them. They're not coachable, meaning they do not embrace mistakes. Okay. So when they make a mistake, instead of working through that mistake, they just vanish. And I'm like, hello, we have a session today. Where are you? Then they make excuses. And I know why they're making excuses, because they don't want to work through that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You Interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very, very much, as always, for taking the time to join me. And today I'm delighted to be joined by French coach, author, speaker, and founder and CEO of Parlez, Rachel Pierre, who is here to discuss her educational work with leaders operating in French-speaking environments. Now, this is really close to my heart, and I'm going to tell you why in a wee minute here. And I don't know that I'm going to cover myself in glory when I do tell you what happened. But Rachel is a native French speaker and spent over 15 years in computer engineering and program management within fintech before building a private executive at French Fluency, intensive design for leaders operating in environments where French is prevalent, maybe not exclusive, but prevalent. And French isn't just a language Rachel teaches, it's the language that shaped who she is. Rachel didn't speak English until she was 18 years old, and this unique journey gives her a profound understanding of what it means to truly think, learn, and express oneself in French, and the transformation that comes with acquiring a new language later in life. Rachel believes that language is not just about words, it's about identity, culture, and the confidence to express your authentic self. At Parlez, Rachel brings together her deep cultural roots, academic training, and professional experience to help ambitious learners achieve true fluency and conversational confidence. Rachel, thank you very, very much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for an amazing introduction.
Thank you. Thank you. So I said I was going to tell you why it was a wee bit close to my heart. I had to accumulate a certain number of points to be able to immigrate to Canada back in 2004. And there's various ways that you can accumulate said points. And part of that was the opportunity to have French as a second language, French being the official second language in Canada. And I said, okay, so there was a French cultural school in Glasgow, and I went to that every Saturday morning for, I can't remember, it was like 10 weeks. And French was never really a strong suit. We did a wee bit of French in school, but not something I was overly keen about or overly passionate about. And then I'm passionate about moving to Canada. So I want to go there. I'm in the class. People are motivated to be there. They want to go on French tours. They want to be able to speak the language and winery tours in southern France and things like that. And then I get to a point where I did 2 exams at the end. One was mandatory and one was optional. And the maximum amount of points that you could get was 1,800, 900 and 900. And I said, okay, so if I do more exams, then I have more opportunity to get the points. And you could get up to 6 points. Was completely fluent in written and oral French. So 6 points. So then my total, so I kept phoning them because I was going through the application and I kept phoning saying, is the results in? Are the results in? Are they there? And they said, Gary, we will phone you as soon as they're in. They're not in. I didn't have a great day on the exam. That's a different story for a different day. And then the results came in and they said, the results are here. Do you want us to open them? Please do. So I can hear the envelope being opened. And she goes, okay. I haven't seen that before. And I said, what happened? What happened? She says, for the first exam, you got 78 out of 900. And I said, okay. And the second exam? And she says, the second exam, you got 120 out of 900. And I said, yes, that was enough for 2 points. Yeah, so it was the worst results they had ever seen in the history of their college. I was beyond thrilled. For many years after that, I said, technically, I am a third French. If you take the High Commission for Canada's, examination criteria, I've told that story so many times, and people are like, why do you think that's a story that people want to hear in public? And I think it's just funny. It was just, I was absolutely thrilled. They were embarrassed for me. And I said, I am ace. I am ace. So I wish we had met over 20 odd years ago, because I think you would have been able to give me a wee bit of help in terms of my examination. But anyway, on to the proper part of the conversation. So you and I had a wonderful conversation in preparation for recording today, Rachel, and I'd love just to give the viewers and listeners a wee bit of an overview. I mentioned it briefly in the bio. You were a French speaker until you were 18. How did it all come about for you to then learn English and then move forward to be on the journey that you're on now?
Yeah, so honestly, it was an accident, really, at least for me, because my intention was never to come to the States for my studies. I actually wanted to go to France. But my dad, being the visionary of the family, he said, no, you're going to the States, especially because you want to do computer engineering. I think if you go to Stony Brook University, you'll excel. This is where you're going. And, my dad being a judge, I knew that, okay, if I approach his logical side, then maybe I could win there. And I said, okay, dad, let's talk this through, because why would it make sense for me to learn a language that relies so heavily on French and then deforms the words? I feel like you're sending me backwards. So why not just send me to France or a francophone country? And he smiled because I guess he didn't know what to say to that. But ultimately, he pulled the dad card. And one day, I'm excited to catch up on my TV show. In French, it's called Le Feu de l'Amour. And in English, it's, I think it's The Young and the Restless. The Young and the Restless.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, I need to catch up. I need to find out what happened. So, we get home together, my siblings and I, my dad, we get home and I rush to the TV and turn it on. And I see a bunch of English channels. And I'm like, okay, I guess the cable, I guess the cable, I guess we have some English channels now. But then I get to my usual channel and it's in English. So I flip through the channels again because I'm like, maybe there's been an update. Um, all English. So I'm panicking. I'm like, Dad, there's something wrong with the cable. I'm gonna miss my show. And he's like, calm down. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with the cable. We no longer have French channels. Now you have no choice but to watch your show in English. I told you to learn English. So he pulled the dad card, and sure enough, because I didn't want to miss my show, I sat there and watched the episode in English. It was so frustrating because I was so focused on the captions that I was missing the action. So I was focused on the words. But eventually, because my dad immersed me in the language, my books, my music, everything was now in English. A year later, here I was in the United States in college for computer engineering, and people were shocked that I had only started learning English the year prior. And, you know, but the way that I learned it not only allowed me to graduate in computer engineering, then go on to corporate America, JP Morgan, just Apple, and excel as a leader. And then to watch executive leaders in rooms where, you know, they suddenly lose their authority just because they don't speak French. And I thought, they don't know my method. I have a secret sauce. I can actually coach them. And so I realized, that there's a business opportunity there because a couple of them did approach me and said, Rachel, could you coach me? I said, it would be my pleasure. And so that's how Parlez started, really. It was just, coincidental.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really, I mean, so for everyone listening, Rachel originally from Haiti.
Yes.
We talked through that previously, and it's incredible. One of the things that I had posed during the pre-conversation was, what does it take to be able to learn a different language? My story of the French experience and getting to Canada
Yeah.
was, it wasn't really a surprise for me, because I've often said that to learn another language, there's, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's your secret sauce, but it's that there's a creativity and artistry
Yeah.
to it that some people take to it very well, and some people don't.
Yeah.
And I am one of the people who don't. And one of the topical things in terms of newsworthy stories related to this conversation of late has been the situation with the CEO of Air Canada. It was certainly big news here, Michael Rousseau, who was there was obviously a devastating accident that happened, and he came out to make a public address, to honour the pilots who had lost their lives in a crash, and said it predominantly in English with just a few words, a couple of words maybe
Yeah.
in French. And as a result, he had to then come out afterwards, after the furor had happened, to say, it's a thing I've struggled with for a long, long time. And it wasn't the first time that I think something like this had happened to him. And then now he's in the process of retiring, and he'll be leaving Air Canada. When you heard that story, what came up for you?
It was pretty, like, I couldn't believe it because at first I thought, how difficult, like, why couldn't his publicist have him practice a few sentences in French? How hard could that be? Because I also read that he practiced he had 300 hours of French practice under his belt, but it was 300 hours over 4 years. So then I went, okay, that's why, because French is already a hard language to learn to begin with. And so, unless you immerse yourself in the language, which is the first step of my program, the first month is survive, meaning, you have no choice but to survive in this language. What that means is, I'm creating this world around you. I'm leveraging your existing routine and taking you from English to French, so that you have no choice. Just like my dad did to me, right? He's like, well, your show is in English. What are you gonna do? You're gonna stop watching it, or you're gonna watch it? I had no choice but to do it. And so, and also I went on to listen to his speech, because I was like, okay, how hard could it be to just say a couple sentences in French? You're gonna ruin your career just for that. And then I listened to the speech, and even the word bonjour was so bad that I
Yeah.
understood why he reverted to English, because I mean, it was just really bad, and I couldn't believe that he had 300 hours of French. So I could understand, and this is something that I come across with, applicants and executives who want me to coach them. They are uncomfortable. They feel so insecure because they've become so accustomed to being in charge, that now they feel like a kid. They don't want to mess up, and even if they do mess up, they don't want to do it in public because they feel like they'll be ridiculed. They don't want to lose power, on a big stage. And so I do understand why he reverted to English. However, this, and that's why I do what I do, is because I realize most language programs just teach them, it doesn't really leverage the person's world to help them, learn, because that's how an adult is going to learn. It's not like you're a child with zero responsibility and all you have to do is memorize. It doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. So those traditional programs, that's why they're not as effective for people with busy lifestyles. But when you incorporate their lifestyle into the learning experience, then there comes retention, because it's something that you leveraging something they do every day. So they have no choice but to practice, right? And
Yeah.
so that's really what came from it. It was very unfortunate. That's something that definitely could have been avoided. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the key things that you mentioned there, and I do really want to spend a bit of time talking about it, because there's learning a language, and I imagine, I don't even know if I'm using the right word, but the mechanics of
Mhm.
learning the language, in terms of structure, in terms of grammar, in terms of inflection and usage
Yeah.
of the wording. But the key part of your program, Rachel, is that opportunity to say, if you're in a French speaking environment, and or it turns into a French speaking environment during a conversation away
Yeah.
from your native tongue, which, let's say, for example, is English, that
Yes.
there's that insecurity that you just spoke
Mhm.
about there, where they're in their head, it's distracting,
Yeah.
and they lose, the word you used was power, but they probably lose some confidence. They lose,
Yeah.
maybe even literally lose the chain of events that's occurring in front of them
Yeah.
right now. So how do you bridge the mechanics, the literal learning of the language, and then, or maybe it's not bridge, how do you enhance that experience to say this will be seamless for you regardless of what language you're speaking in?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a great question, because yes, that's the differential factor with my program, is that I don't just, teach you French, and because yes, grammar is part of it. But also culture is part of it. Like, for example, if you're in the middle of a negotiation and your francophone partner says, that um, we agree, let's say what if they say we agree in theory? Okay, they say nous sommes d'accord en théorie, which means we agree in theory. And for you, if you're not used to the culture, you may take that as a green light to then proceed to, execute documentation and get them ready to sign. So by the time you come back to the room with your documentation, the francophones are taken aback because they're like, we said we agree in theory. That was an invitation for us to talk more so that we're on the same page. It like, so what are you doing? Are you trying to force us, on a dotted line? So my program, addresses that because we take you from survival mode where we change your world to francophone, to francophone world, and then leveraging your existing routine. Then we move on to function. So now we practice conversation, day-to-day conversation, how to order coffee, how to ask for directions, right? And then, but I still leverage those situations. Instead of making grammar the priority, I make your world the priority and then I incorporate grammar into it. So now again, when I'm incorporating grammar, you're able to retain it because you're again leveraging your day to day. So let's say your routine is every morning you go to a coffee shop, let's say it's Starbucks or whatever. Then and I download your routine to make sure that I embody that same routine but in French, right? And so yeah, so that's how I do it differently instead of making the traditional factor the priority where I have you sit down and memorize grammar and memorize vocabulary. No, I leverage your environment to, make it seamless for you. And then I incorporate the grammar, incorporate the vocabulary. So we take you from survival to functioning. And then now that you're able to function, in the language, I take you to command, meaning when the language in the room switches to French, you no longer lose your confidence, you no longer freeze, because that's another thing that I hear a lot is that people say, I do understand French, but when it's my turn to speak, I freeze. The
Yeah.
reason why there's a freeze happening is because your brain your brain was in English and now it's trying to catch on, it's trying to translate. And by the time you're done translating, the conversation has already moved on without you. Right? So and so we address that through my process. We address that freeze so that you are comfortable. So by the time you get to function, that freeze is already gone. So and then so when you go to function, from function to command, now you can seamlessly handle the conversation, handle the room. You ask follow-up questions, you get clarity. And by asking follow-up questions, yes, that involves, because there's no way for anybody to be fluent in any language in 90 days. But at least you're confident enough to say, hey, could you please repeat that? That wasn't clear for me. Could you say it differently? Right? But you're
Yeah.
still in your authority, you still have your confidence, and people know that, hey, you're making an effort. Because that's the other thing people don't realize, it's not about speaking perfectly at first. It's about showing that you're making an effort, that you respect them enough to learn their culture, learn their language, especially if this is somebody or a company or a culture that you want to do business with
Yeah.
for the next decade. So the least you could do is make an effort to try to understand their culture, understand their language, speak their language. And so that's priority. When they see you make an effort, they will, that's something that they will respect, and you will be able to remain in command because you are respected as the leader you are, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've heard, I don't know, direct stories. I don't know if it's even more folklore where if you go somewhere and try and speak the local language and you kind of butcher it a wee bit, that the locals would then they would just ignore you. They would give you an even harder time. So I mean, one, is that true in terms of the French speaking experiences that you've had, and two, if that were if that were to happen, I mean that's like a career changing, you know, potentially career changing scenario situation. How would you handle that if that happened in the boardroom?
Yeah. I don't. Okay, so here's the here's the thing. So it does happen. What does happen often is that you get corrected. The francophones, they see you trying, and their way of supporting you is to correct you. And in North America, I don't know that people appreciate being corrected as much. But in a francophone world, when they correct you, is their way of saying, "I love that you're learning my language, and I want to help you." So
Right.
that's one that I've experienced. The second Yeah, it depends on the context. Let's say, for example, I had a fashion executive. And in the fashion world, I mean, if there's a fashion show coming up, they don't have time to translate for you.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, it's crazy. It's madness. So they're not going to stand here and translate for you. There are people outside. Let's say there's Anna Wintour, chief of Vogue, sitting outside. They have to cater to that audience. They don't have time to translate for you behind the scenes. And so, yes, you will get ignored. And I mean, it's, yeah. So imagine as a leader being ignored, and you can't even blame the team because you understand why you're being ignored. You understand that, their priority is to cater to the audience. And so, yeah, it's devastating. You totally lose confidence. You feel silly, is what I've heard. I feel silly, Rachel. Um, and so, yeah, so it really depends. It's not that they ignore you on purpose, but it really depends on the context. Sometimes they have no choice but to ignore you and you're left
Mhm.
behind. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that I mean, just back to feeling silly. I could just imagine. I mean, I go back to the Air Canada example again. That he managed to navigate it to a point, and then it got to a point where they said, stop. This
yes,
this was a core requisite part of the job. You're not performing this part of the job. Something has to happen now. Whether there was other factors at play, that was certainly one of the main catalysts that is eventually going to end up ending his tenure. So
yes.
one of the things back to the freezing,
Mm-hmm.
part of the process that's quite
Sure.
that quite often happens. I see now and again executives, actually not even executives, people, any normal people in meetings just freezing with English language being their first language, and they have that freeze. So you add another layer of complexity in saying this is now French. What happens inevitably when the freeze occurs? How do you have something within your program that coaches
Yeah.
them through, a statement or a phrase or a regurgitation technique or something?
Yes. So the way that I approach it, because I had the same situation in English, right? So I was primarily French. And the thing is, you freeze because you were not thinking in the new language in the new language. You're thinking in your old language.
Yeah,
So your brain is having a delay. It's delaying because it's like, okay, I thought we were operating in an English world. What is happening right now?
yeah,
And the way that I remove the freeze is by um, doing a what I call a neural reset. I mean, there are studies around it. Neurologists have talked about it, and actually, more recently, this actress Lupita Nyong'o, and she mentioned the same word that I use for my program. She said, "I went survival mode when I was in Mexico because I wanted to learn the language. I wanted to learn the culture. So I refused to speak English, and so, um, which meant that her personality changed for her first few months because she's very outspoken. But then, at first, when people engage with her, she could not fully be conversational because she was trying to find her words. But she
yeah.
said she did not deviate from that. She stayed the course until what I call is function. So she came out of the survival mode and went into function mode. Now she's able to function. And this is exactly how I remove the freeze because and that's the purpose of the survival mode. And there are key sentences. Let's say when you're in function mode and for some reason you find yourself in a situation where a freeze happened. And so there are some phrases that I give, the person, for example, you could say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is, or what I'm interpreting it as is, just to give yourself some time to see if you can catch on. And then ask the person to clarify, could you please repeat that? I didn't quite catch that. But we starting with the neural reset, if the person is committed to that phase, to the survival phase, to the reset, meaning resetting their environment completely to French, even at home, conversations you're having with your partner, with your kids, even they could join in the party too, and
Yeah.
be supportive, and because it's actually fun when your family is involved. The way that I do it, it's a fun way to learn, so the whole family can learn French that way. And so yeah, so that neural reset is really what removes the freeze because when I make your brain understand that, okay, it's no longer English Gary. Gary now speaks French. Once your brain understands, okay, I am a francophone, so I should now have conversations in French. Once your brain has that neural reset, it makes it easier to adapt the language. The freeze is gone because you start seeing yourself as a francophone. So you're like, okay, I have to listen to the news in French. I have to listen to music in French. My world has to be French because I am a francophone. I need to be able to be fluent in that language. Now, once you get out of survival mode and your brain has fully caught on to the fact that, oh, we are learning French, we are francophones, it goes so smoothly in the second phase because your brain started to adjust, to retain, to understand that we are a new person now, and you get to find your identity also in a new language, which is another thing that I love, is watching my clients transform because they get to discover who they are in a new language. Because I don't know about you, Gary, but for me, who I am as a New Yorker is not who I am when I'm in Paris. It's not who I am when I'm in Haiti.
Yeah,
So it's such a beautiful journey. Yeah, and
yeah.
transformation. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it is, and a really good point in terms of using the family, and it made me think in terms of your client base. Do
Hmm.
you see a pattern in your client base that it's more males, more females, younger, older demographic? Is there a pattern that's emerged for you just yet?
My very first client was female, young female, but I find that my most dedicated clients are older male.
Okay.
Those who are actually expanding and are, like CEOs. They've, run companies, and now they're like, okay, I want to expand in the francophone market and I want to be respected. Rachel, coach me. Yeah, so they're older males. Those are the people who are like, let's go because I have a $45 million deal coming up, and if these francophone don't trust me, I'm losing the deal, and that is not an option. Rachel, let's make this happen. So those are my best clients because they're committed. They have a time,
Yeah.
a time commitment. They have a time goal, and yeah, that's where the magic happens. I watch them transform, and they're so happy. But I get it's I do get more males than female that way. And then the females so far have been younger than the male counterparts. Yeah. But it's still
Right.
people who want to invest. Like, she was a real estate investor. Fashion executive was a lot younger. Yeah, yeah.
And the program is the same regardless of whomever age, demographic, or anything? I'm wondering, do men and women learn differently?
So from a gender basis, the same. But here's what is different. It's custom to each individual based on their routine.
Yeah.
So based on what they like, let's say somebody is passionate about F1 racing, or someone is more into real estate and that's their goal. They want to, open a hotel in France. So I customize the program around their goals and their routine, their interests, and so that's how it differs, but it doesn't differ from gender based. There's no difference, only in the sense that, of course, more women will be more interested in fashion than perhaps American football, for example. That would be the difference. But other than that, no. My clients, I would say they learn about the same way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't 100% sure whether to bring this up or not, but Duolingo, your program versus Duolingo. So Duolingo is a wee bit close to my heart because my love, she participates in Duolingo, has a 1,000+ day streak. She's primarily trying to learn Spanish, and she has a real passion for it. And the gamification of
Yes.
Duolingo has her hooked on the streaks and the bonuses and things like that. Your program differs obviously in terms of executive presence and bringing your whole self into it. What's
Yes.
your thoughts in terms of Duolingo?
Listen, I love Duolingo because if you're trying to learn French for travel, yes, do Duolingo. It's fun, especially like the gamification part. Like you said, I mean, there's this game on LinkedIn that's called Zip, And, I got into it at first, just, willy nilly. I was like, something fun to do. But then when I looked at the leaderboard and I was number 12, I was like, no, I want to beat all these people. I want to be number one. And so, and so, so Duolingo is smart that way, that it gets you hooked, from a gamification aspect. And yeah, if you want to learn French for fun, I absolutely say do Duolingo, right? Because you're not going to enjoy my program, because my program is quite intensive. You're only going to appreciate and love my program if, like I said, you have a high stakes goal. You're like,
Yeah.
I need to send my child to Harvard. I already told her she's going to Harvard. She's very bright. She's probably going to be accepted. And right now, I need to close that deal. If I don't close that deal, she's not going to Harvard. She will hate me. So, but that deal, in order for these people to trust me, I need to speak French. So, Rachel, can you get me to close that deal in 90 days in French? They're committed. They have like, okay, now there's like family involvement. There's like, there's a family cost, there's a trust cost, like father-daughter trust cost. Because
Yeah.
one thing that worked for me is that I know if my dad tells me something, I know he's going to deliver. And I don't know what he had to do in the background to make it happen, but I love that he always delivered. And so yeah, so that's those are the clients who will actually enjoy my program and found so much value in it. But if you're just learning French just for fun, just for travel, yeah, Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, is perfect for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Things like that. In terms of your experience with people who have gone through the program, Rachel, what would you say if someone's considering it? And you've already said it's intensive, and there has to be a level of commitment involved,
Yeah.
of course, to truly get the benefits from it.
Yeah.
What are the common blocks that
Okay.
people experience throughout the various phases?
I love that. So one block is travel. So people say, "Oh, I travel a lot. I don't have time." But my program, for example, instead of watching, if you're on Delta One, for example, you're traveling first class, I know you're going to be watching a game on that screen. So instead of watching a game, I'm telling you, no, pull out your iPad and listen to Rachel.
Yeah.
Practice your French, because there's people always make excuses. Oh, I travel a lot. Okay, well, when you're waiting at the airport, what do you do? I know you're scrolling, social media. I know you're doing something. So what I'm telling you is now you need to incorporate French. Okay, incorporate French. When you're sitting down at, Sky Lounge, incorporate French. Okay, so those are the roadblocks I see where people make excuses and say, I'm busy, I'm traveling. Another roadblock is some people are not coachable, is what I call them. They're not coachable, meaning they do not embrace mistakes. Okay, so when they make a mistake, instead of working through that mistake, they just vanish. And I'm like, hello, we have a session today. Where are you? Then they make excuses. And I know why they're making excuses, because they don't want to work through that. For example, I had a client who, she couldn't get to saying tu. She kept saying tu, like the Spanish version. And, I was practicing with her. I was giving her songs to practice the two, Edith Piaf, Charles Navour. And I'm telling her, those are classics. They're oldies, but they work. So just sing, just, follow Edith Piaf. Just sing after her, sing loud. And before you know it, but she's not doing it. She's embarrassed, you know. So yeah, those are some of the roadblocks. It's people internal issues that are blocking them from achieving their goals. Another client, I said, okay, so you can sing in the shower. I want you to sing loud. He goes, but my wife will hear me. And I'm like, so what? That's your wife. And he goes, no, it's too embarrassing. I'm like, no, no. He said, no, my wife will judge me. And I said, I'm pretty sure by now your wife has already judged you 10,000. It's okay. And he's like, no, you don't understand. She will tease me till I die. And I'm like, okay, do you want to do this or not? Like, come on. Like, let's kick the embarrassment, the cringe factor. And we all experience that cringe factor. Let's kick it, kick it away and, make things happen. So, yeah, I would say the roadblocks are typically people who are letting themselves get in the way of their own goals. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. And not embracing the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable at
Yeah.
times, but it's only those difficult moments that help you really obtain the true growth because when you eventually get to
Yeah.
to saying it correctly and or knowing and understanding what the right thing to say is, then you're kind of like, wait a minute, I used to really struggle with that. I don't struggle with that anymore. And then you feel the growth, and then you get momentum and you get more enthusiasm as you're moving forward. It's such a brilliant thing. As I said earlier, especially being in Canada with French being the second language, I never really thought until you and I had connected, Rachel, that this would be such a valuable service for people here who possibly I'm in Alberta, which is kind of second left province from the west coast, or second west from the west coast, and Quebec is way over on the east coast, and I would imagine there are a number of people that would just pull themselves out of any running for a role that might be with a Quebecois company
Yeah.
because they're saying, I can't, I
Yes.
won't, I
Yeah.
shouldn't, and things like that. And so to know that someone like you is out there saying, I've got you. I can
Yeah.
help you with this, and we can. And it's not that you're going in as a novice; you're going in as an authentic, genuine version of yourself at the level you should be going in at. It's such an incredible, incredible gift.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I do get Canadians who come to me and say, if I don't learn this language, I won't be able to. They tell me, I was an executive back home. Now I'm an assistant. Now I'm doing warehouse jobs because nobody will hire me because I don't speak French. Same thing with this lady who actually moved her entire family to Belgium, and she thought English was fine because it's a global company, but she was made redundant because they're like, we need somebody who can speak to our francophone, to francophone market. And
Yeah,
I mean, I felt so bad for her because are you going to move back? She's like, I'm not going to move back. My son has already, is already accustomed to to the country. He has friends here. So I have no choice but to now learn French. And so, yeah, I definitely observed it a lot throughout my career. That's how I was able to observe it. But you're right. I didn't even think about Canadians until they started reaching out to me, and I was like, but you're not in Quebec, so you should be able to find jobs. And you're like, uh, it's the same thing. They're asking me to speak French. It's not just for Quebec. One
yeah.
lady called me from Ontario. I was like, but you're in Ontario. You should be fine. I was like, no, I need to learn French. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Such a brilliant model, and something so genuinely tangible. Like as coaches, sometimes you don't get to see the end product of the work that you do with clients, because they're with you for a very short time. They move on. You might keep in touch or reach out now and again and say how's things going, but you don't truly get to see that. Whereas for you, especially with I have 90 days. This deal is pending. I need this help. You will get that immediate feedback, to be able to say that worked, and I would imagine constantly reimagining your program based on the process and the progress and the journey that people
yeah,
are on, so you have a bit of an evergreen arrangement. It's
yeah.
just it's so fascinating, and such a, I don't know, I feel a lot more comfortable now, knowing that if should a situation ever arise that I needed to do that, I would just call you and
Yes,
say, Rachel, it's time to go, and not feel that additional burden or fear. Just so good. So in terms of the podcast, as you know, the podcast is called The Best You. And I like to take an opportunity to ask each guest, what's
yes.
a regular practice that Rachel employs to give you the best opportunity to be the best version of yourself?
Besides praying, because I'm a Christian woman, besides checking in with my vision board from time to time and, going through my vision board before I go to bed so that my subconscious know, what to help me accomplish. I do love to refer to people who have inspired me throughout my life, like people that I've watched go from nothing to amazingness, right? People who have overcome like whatever situations I may be dealing with at the time. Like for example, one person that I'm talking about right now on my Instagram is Simone de Beauvoir. She was a um an icon and philosopher, but in her time, she was the only woman to pass this very rigorous philosophical exam in France, and she took it. In her first time, she won second place. The greats, have never done that. Actually, the greatest was Jean-Paul Sartre at the time. He failed his first time. He had to take it again. And so now, because of that, now she was now accepted in rooms where there was no seat for her at the table because it was such a male-dominated field. But now her mind was needed. They welcomed her at the tables. And so it's very encouraging because when I face similar hurdles where I feel like I need to, how do I say, bring my own chair because the room is not going to give you power. People are in the boardroom, they're not going to say, hey, Rachel, come sit down. You have to bring your own chair and say, I belong here. And this is why I belong here. You need me for ABC. And so those are the people that I, try to, I read about them. I go back and read about them and I think about them. And it really gives me such encouragement because it's such a good feeling to remember that you're not the first person who's been here.
Yeah.
Other people have faced this in probably more rigorous times than you have. At least I could say a lot of women have paved the path for me because I
Yeah.
cannot imagine being the first ever to say, yes, I know you've never allowed a woman in this room, but here I am. That must be so frightening.
Yeah.
Even though that happened to me in computer science, I mean, even in college, it was just three of us women in the department, right? So I have been in those rooms, but it brings me joy and comfort to know that others have made it back in 1929. So I can make it today in 2026. Yeah. Yeah.
100%, 100%. Yeah, using historical references and as inspiration, as learning, as growth opportunities is so powerful. This has been fantastic, Rachel. Before I let you go, where can people find out more about you and Parley?
Yeah, so a few options. You can find me on LinkedIn, Rachel Pierre. You can find me on Instagram, Rachel's French Method. I do have a website. It's parleymethod.com. And there's also parley-method.com if you want to be more specific, if you want to take an executive fit assessment and see if you're a good fit for my program. If you have, like you, Gary, like you said, maybe you'll, find yourself in I mean, you have my direct contact. You can always contact me. But for
Yeah.
anybody who's listening and you're like, hey, would it be a good fit for Rachel's program? Go to parley-method.com and take the fit assessment. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'll get all that information on the show notes. Rachel, I was so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you very much for all the work that you're doing and helping people, be more authentically themselves in a wider world that gives them the opportunity to serve and the world at large. I knew this was going to be a great time. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I had such a great time telling my story and talk about the program. And, I mean, this was fun. Thank you so much for having me on your show.